2026 meeting of UFO. Last month I had to be cancelled due to inclement weather, so on behalf of Emily and Mike and myself, I'd like to wish you a belated Happy New Year to everybody. Surprisingly enough, UFO has now been in existence for, must be 11 years this year. So can I take the opportunity to thank you very much for all your support, without which this organisation would not be so successful as it is. Unfortunately, after all this time, we've still not got to the bottom of the phenomenon. In fact, we've probably got more questions than answers. We've had a lot of excellent speakers. On the plus side, if the truth was revealed to us, I don't suppose we're out of the job, and no point in being here, who does? So anyway, tonight, our guest speaker this evening is Mr. Guy Stephen Needler. And Guy initially trained as a mechanical engineer and quickly became a chartered electrical and electronics engineer. However, he's always been aware of the greater reality around him as he regularly caught glimpses of the world of spirit. And from his teens to his early 20s, these glimpses drew him to read extensively about the subject and to meditate intensely. And he eventually became a Reiki master and pursued a 4-year commitment to learn energy and vibrational therapy techniques. After extensive studying, he became a member of the Complementary Medical Association. And during his training as an energy healer, Guy learned that he was able, via meditation, to traverse the frequencies above those associated with the auric layers. And during these trips to the higher frequencies, he discovered he could communicate with the energetic entities that existed on the various levels of our multiverse. Now, these communications eventually led to the preparation of published manuscripts. Now, Guy has regularly spoken at various different conferences. He's been on the radio and is also the author of many books, which are on display over there on my right-hand side, which you can have a look at in the interval. You may recall that Guy gave us a talk back in August 2019 where he addressed the subject of aliens and also sentience and greater reality. But tonight, following on from that, he'll be presenting 2 short talks. Now, the first, which we do in the first half, is what are aliens and UFOs and where do they come from? And after the break, we'll be discussing belief versus knowledge-based systems. So, without further ado, please put your hands together for Mr. Guy Needler.
Thank you. How many of you are new people to UFO? Yeah? So, how many of you saw this presentation or other presentations from myself before? 7 years ago, so just a couple of you. Okay. Well, the first one is something you've already seen. Into the volume down a little bit. Yeah. And the second one is really, it ties in nicely because I'm going to show you a metaphysical angle towards aliens and UFOs rather than the mechanical stroke humanistic side of it. So it's a different angle altogether. But the most important thing is the second presentation will give you a gateway into moving from believing somebody to knowing that what they're saying from an authoritative position is true, because I'm going to give you a little exercise you're all going to do, or we're all going to do it together, to enable us to see the difference between belief and experiential or knowledge-based systems. But let's go to this particular presentation. So I'm going to talk about the 4 different genres of the alien form. And I'm going to use the word alien, but in reality I like to use the word entity, because from my perspective, aliens are just bodies that our souls occupy. So there's a little bit of reincarnation aspect associated with it. I'm also going to look at the different types of vehicle they use, or the things that we observe as vehicles. Where they're located in the physical universe, or beyond the physical universe. And then I'm going to give you a reason for why we have abductions. And there's a couple of different reasons for that, not just simply aliens coming down and taking us and poking and prodding us and finding out different things about the human body and putting implants in there. Okay. But first I need to set the scene about where we exist in what I call the greater reality. You see, we exist in a multiverse environment, not just the physical universe. And there's 12 what I call full dimensions in the multiverse itself. Now, quantum physicists and theoretical physicists now recognise there's 11 dimensions. But the word dimension is a bit confusing because it's used in error, I feel. We talk about, we're in the third dimension here, 3D. And the Americans talk about 3D a lot. But my understanding is we live in a frequential environment. And the dimensions are much larger, or much higher level of structure. So my understanding is we've got 12 full dimensions in a small area within structured space. Now, within those 12 dimensions, there's 408 frequencies. And within those 408 frequencies, there's 397 universes. So the majority of the universes exist within 11 dimensions, which ties in quite nicely with quantum physics and theoretical physics. But the first full dimension is where we exist right now. So I'm going to just describe something very, very quickly. The multiverse has 12 full dimensions. A dimension is a different piece of structure. We're not talking about 3D, which is a measurement of volume, height, width and depth. That's interesting. Then we talk about time being the fourth dimension. And then people talk about we're ascending, we're going to be a higher level of consciousness whilst on Earth. And we go to the fifth dimension. Now, why do we go from the third dimension to the fifth dimension? Because it's time. But then you ask people, say, well, time doesn't exist. So how can something that doesn't exist have a point in reference in a structured universe or multiversal situation? And it can't. So that tells you that the word about we're in 3D is actually wrong. We're in a frequential state. So if I describe the multiverse in general, you can understand a little bit more about where we're going to go with the rest of the presentation. So the multiverse is created through these 12 full dimensions. They all behave in the same way, structure-wise, apart from the first one, so I'll leave that to one side. So from the second full dimension up to the 12th, they all split out into 3 subdimensional components, and each of those subdimensional components splits out again into 12 frequency levels or frequency bands. Each of those frequency levels or frequency bands has enough finitude, as I call it, to allow a universal environment to exist within. And every time we go up a frequency level or a frequency band, the content or the space within it increases by the power of 12. So we've got 11 times 3 times 12, which is 396 frequency bands or frequency levels within those 11 full dimensions, which creates 396 universes. But then we go to the first full dimension, which is the oddball. I'll explain why it is. It houses the lowest of the frequencies, so it behaves in a slightly different way. So although it splits out into these 3 subdimensional components, it collapses back into a composite subdimensional component that only allows 12 frequencies to be created, not 3 times 12. Now those frequencies are so low that they don't have enough finitude to house a universe in their own right. In fact, they don't have enough finitude to house a universe in any other combination other than all 12. So we have one universe that has all those 12 frequencies together. And that's the difference between the physical universe, because that's the lowest of the frequencies, existing in the first full dimension, and the other universes and the other frequencies in the second full dimension upwards. So the physical universe is quite unique, because it's the only universe that occupies a whole dimension, and it's the only universe that has other frequencies other than one to create it. Think of it this way. How many of you remember floppy disks? You can stick your hands up. I did. I remember the big 12-inch ones, by the way. I tell my age. Yeah. Remember, you had to have lots of floppy disks to load a computer program or to hold a file on your computers. Now you've got a memory stick, which is smaller space, and you can get memory sticks that are 2 terabytes now. So there's thousands upon thousands upon thousands of the same file size that previously took, let's say, 12 floppy disks to hold, now contained in a smaller space. And that's sort of how the multiverse works. Okay? So the physical universe is unique. It's got all these different levels. Where we exist now is in the first 3 frequencies. That creates the gross physical. The next frequencies upwards hold a different level of content So it can, if you wanted to, by being a higher frequency and therefore having access to the lower frequencies, because you're a higher frequency, access those lower frequencies as well. But because the next level upwards is a higher frequency, it relies on evolution to see that next level. So the higher frequencies tend to be, while we incarnate, tend to be hidden from us. But when we are not incarnate, we can see them all. So all the lower frequencies we can see below us, but those above us we can't. And that's important because we're dealing about the physical universe. And being able to exist at a higher frequency is going to give you a springboard to understanding how aliens and their craft can move around quite quickly. Okay, so let's look at the different genres of alien form. Okay. What I'm going to tell you is that the number of different images in this presentation that I've taken off the internet, they're examples, they're a thought process. They're not specifically correct. They're somebody's imagination or they're based upon somebody's thought processes. So take them with a pinch of salt, but use them to think of, oh, okay, that might be about right. Okay, so I'll explain some of the images as well as I go through them, because they're good examples, but they're not correct. Okay. So, all the entities we can see, from a physical perspective, are incarnate in the physical universe. They're like us. They're a body type. And the number of different body types there are in the physical universe is as diverse as the number of animal types, insects, fish life, mammals, etc. that we see on Earth. Anything that can hold sentience is a body type that our souls, or I'm told to call the smaller aspect of sentience from our higher self, or true energetic self, can house the soul. So dolphins can, whales can, horses can, dogs can, cats can, but a different genre of sentience. So a body type like ours has the capability of holding quite a lot of sentience, a soul type. And so does the bodies that are used by other entities when they incarnate into the physical universe. And they come here to experience, learn and evolve in an environment which is particularly difficult to exist within. As I explained before, the gross physical versions of ourselves exist in the first three frequencies associated with the physical universe. And the variance of form factor or body type is basically a function of the environments in which they are capable of existing within. The Earth has an air-based environment, carbon dioxide and oxygen, and other trace elements. Of course, you've got the sea, which is H2O. But there's other locations around the physical universe where entities might breathe sulfur gases, for example, or they might exist in much higher temperatures, or they might exist in a sea-based environment. So the body types are based upon what's supported by the environment in a particular planet, in a particular system, in a particular galaxy within the physical universe. So they're physical. They're like us, gross physical. We can see them with our physical eyes. Even though our physical eyes have got very limited visual range, we can't see the ultraviolet, we can't see the infrared. We see between 400 and 700 nanometers of wavelength of light. So anything that's gross physical we can see. We can see this microphone, we can see the projector, we can see the books, the people around here, the chair, the table and the chairs. Anything that's above that is in what I'm called the spiritual and physical aspect. I say spiritual, but I don't like to use the word because it sort of makes you think about religion. But think about energetic instead. Not totally energetic, but in an in-between house between energetic and gross physical. So the frequencies above the first three, which create the gross physical, the fourth, fifth, sixth and seventh, which we sometimes call the astral levels, the lower astral, the fourth, the upper lower astral, the fifth, the lower upper astral, the sixth, and the upper astral, the seventh, are graduations in frequency where the level of evolution associated with the soul incarnates into a body associated with the frequency. So, for instance, an entity that incarnates in a body in the seventh frequency would be totally invisible to us. Actually, so would the fourth frequency body. But it's still incarnation, it's still part of the physical universe, it's just a higher frequency. But it's nevertheless capable of existing here, provided that they make the right preparations for themselves to not be affected by the lower frequencies of the physical universe. So, these entities who incarnate in these body types, different body types around the physical universe, have a different level of functionality associated with their frequency. So, they would be able to do things like telepathy really easily, telekinesis really easy, creativity in the higher frequencies quite easily. Telekinesis, all of these different things are available to them because they're a higher frequency. Additionally, the ability to control their body would be something they could do as well. They could change the temperature in their body to account for being in a cold environment, or they could cool it down by thought to compensate for being in a hot environment. They could change the way in which they aspire the environment, the air, whatever air they've got, whatever gas they have to use to be able to survive. They could control all of those different things. So they have metaphysical functions as well. And more importantly, they have the ability to connect with the greater reality because their frequencies are higher. Now, let me just talk about that a moment, so I'm going to digress slightly. We can only communicate with each other via a physical means. Sign language, speech, writing, emails, these sort of things, telephones, television. They're physical means to augment our ability to communicate over long distances. But when we're at a higher frequency, we're connected to where we normally exist with our higher selves, because the higher frequency has a greater communicative bandwidth. So, think of it this way. Where we are now is like using a computer back in the 1970s. It's either ticker tape, it's either magnetic tape, maybe hard drives, lots of stacks of them. But the communication between computer and computer was almost zero to non-existent because they used the standard telephone cables for modems. So that type of computer communicating with today's computer, for example, connected to the internet, the communication will be so slow, the processing power is so slow that they can't communicate. So, because there's a just complete mismatch in technology. That's basically where we are with our frequencies. We're in a lower frequency, we're like a computer back in the old 1960s and 70s. Those in the fourth and fifth frequency and above, it's like they're where we are now. They can access the internet by using the search engine. And above that, they've got instantaneous access because they're part of it, so they understand it. So you can see the functions and their abilities are quite different to ours. And there's lots of different examples of people who've communicated with entities or aliens, and they said that they understand the meaning of the universe. They understand why they're here. They understand that they have a role to play, and that role is to experience, learn and evolve, and to connect with other entities. Not to cause problems or to war with each other or to argue. It's about understanding and sharing. What I call the spiritual versions now exist in the 8th through to the 12th frequency level, the higher levels of frequencies within the physical universe. So I would classify this as more being really energetic, really energetic, but not quite energetic. It's a higher level of existence. It's still incarnation, but barely incarnation. So if you look at this image, for example, here, they're almost, basically you would just see stars and dots and dashes and very little of them if we could see them. For themselves, it would be almost like being solid, but in their version of solid. So again, their example, they would probably exist in a planet that we can't see, but is nevertheless there. So whereas we have like Jupiter, which is a gas giant, it's there because the gas we can see, because the gas is almost solid. But if it increased the frequency, we wouldn't see it. That doesn't mean it's not there, because we can't see it. But if we use the right technology, we can see it. So we have the three groups, well, the four genres of entity. The first three, very gross physical, astral level, if you want to call it that, and then spiritual higher up, but all within the physical universe. So, again, they have connection with who and what they are. Their communicative bandwidth is increased significantly. They can communicate instantaneously with the larger volume of sentience that their soul, or smaller aspect of sentience, originates from. They know they're in several places at once. And if any of you have read any of Dolores Cannon's books, have any of you read Dolores Cannon's books? Yeah? Where she's communicating with people under hypnosis, primarily under therapy, but then through investigative process. They say that we're elsewhere as well. We're not just here. And that explains some of the things I've picked up myself about why we have abductions. But in essence, the higher part of them is at a level associated with their evolution level within the multiversal environment. So whatever their environmental level is associated with their evolutionary level as well. So they might normally exist in the 7th full dimension, a frequency within there, the universe within there, but then they project their sentience down the frequencies to a lower frequency to experience, learn, evolve what it's like to be in a different environment with limitations. Now, the gross physical universe, in fact, the physical universe in totality is particularly difficult to exist within. This is like being deaf, dumb and blind and being asked to go to the centre of the maze and get back out again. It's almost impossible to be here, but we manage, and the evolutionary content associated with it is significant. So that's why we come here. But again, these higher levels of entity, they incarnate into the higher frequencies. They've got almost total connectivity with who and what they are and the rest of the multiversal environment. All those entities that they need to interact with. The 4th version are nothing to do with the physical universe. They are a combination of sentience and energy, such as what we are when we disincarnate, and they stay in that environment. They don't incarnate in any of the bodies, any of the form factors, any of the locations associated with the physical universe, in any of the frequencies. But they might want to experience and observe what we're doing here. They don't have a form factor at all. But we do sometimes see them as balls or orbs. And there's plenty of videos of strange oscillating lights in the sky appearing and being there. And there's plenty of people who've got digital photography, where you've seen orbs in your photographs. Have you seen those at all? Yeah? That's a good example. If you've got a good quality digital camera, and you get the image on the highest resolution you can, when you take it, zoom into the structure associated with those orbs. It's got some really fascinating structure. It's not dust. It's not the trick of the light. The technology associated with digital photography is leaky. It doesn't just see what we can see with our physical eyes, it sees higher frequencies as well. Because it's not controllable. We haven't got the technology to control the narrow band that we see, so it sees more. But the software tries to interpret it and therefore give it an image. That's why we get these orbs there. So it's seeing something we can't see, and it's still able to give it a representation on the screen or the printout or the computer screen. Now, another way to prove that is get your phones or your digital cameras and then look at one of the cameras that is used for security, and you'll see the infrared LEDs. Yeah? You don't see them alight at all with your physical eyes. Look through your camera, you'll see the LEDs. Celia and I went to see the Northern Lights a few years ago, and when you see them with the naked eye, it's just like seeing weak clouds. When you put your digital camera or your phone there, you see all the different colours and the lights, because it's picking up the frequency of light that we can't see with the eyes. So all these things you see on television, these wonderful photographs, is because it's being captured by devices, film, etc., that are capturing other light that we can't see. So these entities, they don't exist normally in the physical universe. They come from where we normally exist when we disincarnate. They are extremely powerful. When we're not constrained by the physical environment, we are pretty powerful, actually. We can communicate with everything instantaneously. It doesn't matter which universe that we're in, provided it's a function of evolutionary level, we can communicate with any entity that's in there. So we can communicate across different universes. We connect with the larger volume of sentience that we call the source, what we sometimes call God in religious texts. But we can communicate with that larger volume of sentience that we're all part of. So we're all actually one at the end of the day. And our creativity level, what we can create through thought, or instantaneous thought or desire, can be on a galactic level. We could create multiple galaxies to do what we want to do, or experience what we want to experience in these higher frequencies, which actually are higher levels of universal environment. So there's no need to incarnate for these. They can get to a point where they've mastered being in the gross physical. They've mastered incarnation. They don't get trapped by addictions of any sort, whether it's materialism, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, whether it's money, whether it's sensory stimulation such as sex or being an adrenaline junkie by base jumping, for example. They are totally beyond it. They've mastered incarnation. They've mastered being in the gross physical. They've mastered being in the physical universe. They're what spiritualists call ascended masters. They've moved beyond it. And to some extent we're aware back in those levels because we've moved out of this body. We're the same. But we come here because we've got work to do. We want to experience different levels of, shall we say, difficulty and evolve as a result of that. Okay. So there's 4 different genres there. Gross physical, spiritual, physical or astral. Spiritual, which is slightly higher in frequency, and then purely energetic, which is beyond the physical universe. Now then, they have a number of different ways of getting around, and this is quite an interesting thing, because although I've talked about 4 genres, there's actually 3 types of vehicle or methodology that they use to move around, not just the physical universe, but within the multiverse as well. So, the first ones, we talked about gross physical. They've got what I would call mechanical vehicles. The archetypical UFOs that would allow them to move vast distances across the local galaxy. They used different ways of manipulating space around themselves. They can move through gravitational attractivity, they can use electromagnetism to create locally high frequencies that pushes them into the next frequency level, so they can move across to another point in that frequency level, which is much faster, which is a high frequency, and then drop down. So it looks like they've spent, I don't know, let's say 4 minutes to travel 3 light years, because they've moved into a different frequential level and they've come down the other side. But that has to be done in a mechanical way. So, as I just said, they move in a way which is associated with the frequential level that their vehicle creates. They're able to move, and when we see them going from not there to there very quickly, it's because they've moved from one frequency to another. They've probably done a big curve to get there in spatial terms, but because they've suddenly moved from there to there, and we put it as being a right angle turn, it's simply that they've moved into one frequency to make a differential move. So they would disappear when they use their drive technology, because they're moving from one frequency to the other. Now, it might not be very far above us from the way in which our eyes function, the frequency our eyes work on, but it's above where we are, so we don't see them. So from that perspective, they appear to disappear and reappear at some distance away. So they're using frequential technology in all sorts of different ways. We have lots of different modern day myths about the Philadelphia experiment, where a boat in a harbour at Philadelphia was using rotating and non-rotating pulsating magnetic generators, and it disappeared. And the crew of the boat experienced all sorts of different things. They said they were in a different environment, it looked like the Earth, but it wasn't the Earth. They saw other entities there, but they started to lose their sort of individuality of structure. So when they turned these generators off, they started to meld with the ship. And some of them obviously died because they become part of the superstructure of the ship. Similar sort of thing that these guys have got it mastered, so they had become part of their ship. So the next level is the astral levels of entity. So again, it's spiritual and physical. They exist in the frequencies between the fourth, but also the 12th. So anything that's in the gross physical universe is in the first three. Anything above that, from a vehicle perspective, is between the fourth to the 12th, because they use similar technologies, really. So again, they can use the ways in which materials are structured to help them move from one point to another. We call it sacred geometry. They know that certain materials with certain shapes attract certain energies. And those certain energies, when combined, can create abnormalities in space-time, if you want to call it that, or in the gross physical. So they can move from one point to another, or they can move from one point to another in the frequencies that they're associated with. There's also something called starburst energy, which is using the power of a star, that was described in my first book, The History of God. And that uses the stars as refueling stations, if you want to, and move from star to star to be able to use this energy that's there. It's normally there. Again, it's much more powerful than just burning hydrogen. There's lots of different electromagnetic effects as well. But they can also use what we call cosmic energy, which is energy that is free. We call it prana sometimes. The Hindus call it prana. And that's the energy that is just there. In some respects, the sacred geometry type of attractivity uses the same thing, but the lower the frequencies, because it's using the physical interface. So again, these higher frequency, but still in the gross physical, still in the physical universe, they, by using this technology, which is more, not quite energetic, but more energetic than being gross physical, they can move vast distances. They normally exist, again, in these higher frequencies, 7th, 8th, 9th frequency. They can move to the 12th and move great distances. So they could potentially move from one side of the universe to the other side of the universe relatively easy, whilst still being in the universe and still being constrained by the frequencies associated with the universe. So they create a condition as well, where they maintain who and what they are. Now, when an entity exists on a higher frequency, as I previously explained, they have lots of different functions. They have creativity, they have control of their bodies, they don't need to have food, they can take energy from the environment, they can teleport, they have telekinesis, they have telepathy, they have instantaneous communication. They have creativity to a certain extent. They can create something out of the atmosphere. They can create something out of quantum latency, what to call that. But they use a means of making sure that they don't lose their capabilities when they come down lower frequencies. Remember I talked about communicative bandwidth and where we are now being similar to using a 1960s or 70s computer terminal versus where we are now, where we can access the internet on our phones. The two wouldn't communicate with each other because the processing power of the one is far in excess of the capabilities of the other one. So if they come down these frequencies, they're affected by the frequencies. So for instance, if you're able to communicate instantaneously by thought, create a new watch by thought, and you come down to this frequency, you think you could do it, but you can't, because the frequencies are so low, you've lost that capability. So to enable themselves to maintain their functionality, they have a technology, whether they use it directly by self-generation, or whether they have the technology in their environments with their vehicles to maintain the frequency inside to be the same as where they normally are, even if they're in a lower frequency environment. So they maintain their abilities whilst being here, which is why they're only here temporarily, because it's a lot of energy to maintain a higher frequency in a low frequency environment. But if you think about it, we do it as well. The air on the planet is quite a high frequency environment. when you compare it to the water, the sea. So we maintain a high frequency environment to allow ourselves to go under the water, don't we? We have submarines. They're pressurised to make sure that the hull doesn't collapse, but it's still air inside. And outside is very dense, it's water. And the deeper we go, the more the pressure is, the more compensatory pressure is needed inside sometimes. Sometimes it depends on the technology. So we also have technology to make sure that we can exist in a lower frequency environment. So use that thought process about other entities or aliens that normally exist in a higher frequency in the physical universe to get themselves down here. So you might find that their craft have a glow around them, a force field that's a frequential force field that divides between the lower frequencies of where we are and the higher frequencies of where they normally exist and the craft exists. Now think of something else as well. I talked about them moving up a frequency to be able to move fast from one point to another point in the location or the part of the universe that they normally exist within. So to save time, so to speak, to go from there to there in fractions of the time it would take to go from there to there in their normal frequential level. They would still need to maintain their frequency at that lower level. Because if they go to a higher frequency, they start to get confused with all the different functionality that they would have at that higher frequency. So we start to see that they need to protect themselves from higher frequencies as well as lower frequencies. And we do that as well, don't we? We have aeroplanes. The air gets rarefied the higher we go, to the point where we can't breathe at all. So the aeroplanes are pressurised with air pretty much at ground level, not quite, but pretty much at ground level. So we can maintain our frequency and our functionality whilst we're in a higher frequency environment. Because the density of air is a function of frequency. So where we are now is quite dense. Not quite as dense as the water, but it's denser than it would be if you're 11 miles up or in space. So we have our own way of doing this as well, of existing in our normal low frequency environment whilst going into a higher frequency. And that's what they do with these vehicles they've got. Now let's look at this other version. We're talking about entities now, aliens, we want to call them that, other body types, that aren't body types actually. They're energetic. There's no incarnation involved. They exist in the parts of the multiverse that are purely energetic. There's no need to have this, because they can communicate, they can exist, they can create, they can experience, they can learn, they can evolve without becoming part of something which is, should we say, particularly challenging. They can create what they need to create and evolve from that in a way that they need to evolve. Whereas here it's quite an evolutionary accelerator. But they would move around if they wanted to come here. They do, they observe, don't stay long, by creating a bubble of energy around them that again creates an environment that supports their own frequency level, a higher frequency while they're here. So that allows them to maintain things like connectivity, creativity, instantaneous communication through sentience, and maintains their memory set as well, most importantly. So we've seen these objects that sometimes look spherical, sometimes look amorphous in form, moving around the sky or staying stationary, if they're just observing. So if they're stationary, they're just maybe creating a frequential portal where they can see through, observe, without actually coming in. So they would appear to be quite fluidic, almost like seeing the northern lights but moving around, if you can see them. And those are the entities that are disincarnate. They don't need to incarnate, they've evolved beyond it, or they just don't want to incarnate. And they're still interested in seeing what we do here. Because this environment, the Earth environment, from a spiritual perspective or metaphysical perspective, is the only planet in the gross physical aspect of the physical universe where we've got individualised free will. All the other entities have a level of collective will. Not quite hive mind, but some of them can be. But they have a thought process built into them where they have to consider their thoughts, behaviours and actions and how it affects the environment and those other individuals around them or a distance from them. So where we are now is quite an important area within the physical universe, in the gross physical universe as well. And that's why we see other entities coming here and seeing us. they're seeing how we're doing. We're not doing a particularly good job at the moment, but they can observe. And the images we get sometimes are just amorphous variations in space, and I've seen a few of them on YouTube and stuff, are simply the energies that they're using to maintain their frequency and to make sure that they get trapped in these lower frequencies. Okay, so let's have a look at where they come from. And again, we've got some quite good images here. That, of course, is Jupiter. This gives you a little bit of an idea about a multiverse environment. Again, it's not specifically right, because it all exists in the same space, not individualised like bubbles like this, but it's a good way of thinking about it. So, I've basically gone over this several times, but I'll go over it again. The gross physical entities, or aliens, originate in the gross physical frequencies associated with the physical universe. Other planets, in other galaxies. They use higher levels of technology to move from one point to another point and to come and see other locations where there's some level of civilization. And so they tend to be quite close to us. Not specifically what you call Syrians or Greys or the smaller ones, the black, more darker grey ones, that are the dwarf-sized ones. Okay. But they are, and they're not specifically humanoid either. That's a Star Trek universe type thing. Any form factor that can hold sentience will hold sentience. So it could be even octopoid-like, or even slug-like. Yeah? But from where we are, most of those that visit us are from the local areas, from the gross physical, in our particular galaxy. The next level up, the spiritual and physical, the astral levels, the fourth frequency through to the seventh, they tend to be other galaxies or nebulae which are further away. So they could be, let's say for instance, if the entities we see in the gross physical are in our backyard, these might be in the next city, for example, is an example of distance. Yeah? So they, again, they're invisible to human eye, and so are these galaxies. You know, what we can see in terms of the number of galaxies that are in the physical universe is simply a function of the gross physical. If we went up to the 12th frequency, you wouldn't see any darkness. It'd be full of the light associated with the different suns at different frequential levels. It'd be packed. There's no gaps in the middle, no dark matter holding the universe together, because it's all held together because it's got more content at higher frequencies. So these come from different galaxies that we can't see, but they're nevertheless within the spiritual and physical levels, the astral levels. And again, even higher, the 8th frequency to the 12th frequency, still in the physical universe, but again at much higher frequencies. So those, even in the 7th frequency level, who are in locations, in planets, in galaxies that are at higher frequential level, they still wouldn't be able to detect or see those that are in the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th and 12th, because they're much higher. Again, invisible to human technology. Even the 4th frequency is pretty invisible to human technology. So the next level is really being outside of the physical universe in its totality. So they are in the multiverse, in a frequency or a universe associated with a subdimensional component which is associated with a particular full dimension. And other universes, or a multiverse environment, from a theoretical physics perspective, is purely conjecture. But from a metaphysical perspective, and from people who've channeled information, even old yogis in Hindu religions have reported being able to connect with entities that are not from this particular universe. So it's there, but we don't have the technology to be able to detect them yet. But they're nevertheless there, and they're in the higher frequencies associated with the multiverse as well. And again, going back to the description of multiverse, 12 full dimensions. The first full dimension is basically where the physical universe is. It uses all the frequencies, 12 of them, that the first full dimension has created as a function of its existence in structured space. One universe, 12 frequencies. The other 11, second through to the 12th, they all have 3 subdimensional components. Each of those subdimensional components has 12 frequencies. So each full dimension has 36 frequencies and therefore 36 universes. So we have 1 plus 396, which is 11 times 3 times 12, equals 397 universes in 408 frequencies. And to be honest, this bit about a difference between the first full dimension and the second full dimension fooled me for a long time, because I couldn't quite get my head around what was going on. There was something not quite right when I was channeling the information. So you start to see, if you get a chance to read the books, the history of God, you see I get to a certain point where it's quite linear. And then I found out later, in the next book, Beyond the Source One, that my understanding was wrong and that the physical universe was unique because it's basically occupying a whole dimension in its own right. Okay. So, just about got enough time to go through the next bit. Nicely, before the break. What about abductions? How does that happen? Why does it happen? Well, we know that there is a reason that certain people are taken and they're monitored in some way. They have implants, they have these nanoscopic or different frequential states where they're monitoring things like blood pressure, blood type, stress levels, disease levels, all these different things. Yeah, how much they use their individualised free will, how they interact with people. But we, from our perspective, we think that they're being quite nasty to us. They're taking people, drugging them, or putting them to sleep in some way so they don't get stressed out, and they're putting trackers on them, markers on them. But we do that to animals, don't we? We take animals out of their natural environment, we stress them out, put them in cages, we poke thermometers in other places they shouldn't have thermometers, we take blood samples, and we put trackers on them, GPS trackers. We let them back out again. So we do exactly the same thing to animals that these other entities at higher frequency, or in the gross physical levels of frequency, are doing to us to monitor how the human body is coping with all the different environmental and psycho-spiritual and psychological changes we're going through. Now, from a metaphysical or spiritual perspective, this isn't random. The individuals who are abducted agree to do it before their incarnation, because the entities that are working with them, they know in a disincarnate state. So it's an agreed contract, if you want to call it that. So just because they're abducted doesn't mean that it's random. It's planned and understood. But because we're in a lower frequency environment, we lose all this memory because our communicative bandwidth is reduced significantly. So we can't connect with that which we really are until we become disincarnate or the body dies. The other reason is something called a sub-incarnation. Now, I first discovered this in 2012 when one of my readers and one of my clients said he had this feeling about being from a different planet. And, you know, you can imagine a number of people say, oh, I'm born in Arcturus, oh, I'm born in Pleiades, you know, I've come on the star chart. Mostly, we come from the higher frequencies, from a disincarnate state, down to an incarnate state. So we're not associated with the planets, with the frequencies and the galaxies associated with the physical universe. However, if we chose to have 2 incarnations at once, we can have a primary incarnation, i.e. our sentience is predominantly located in one body, in a high frequency, and we can choose to, provided we've got the right level of sentience and frequency, so we're in a higher frequency, say 7th, 8th or 9th frequency, move a percentage of our sentience, our consciousness, out of that body, in parallel with being in another body. So we can be born in a body or walk into another body and experience life here and life in another location as well. And Dolores Cannon established this in some of her hypnosis-based investigations, where she was speaking to somebody who was explaining the environment that some of the part of their soul was experiencing. They were here, but they're also somewhere else. And I found this out completely, I won't say randomly, but without any knowledge of what Dolores Cannon was finding out with the hypnosis. So that gives you validity from both sides. So it's possible that you're in two places at once. Now, this also gives us reason to have the induction, because it's possible that when we move part of the sentience from one body in a higher frequency to another body in a lower frequency, it's either done through the intention of that sentience, if it's high enough frequency, or there's some form of mechanical means or device that allows or creates a split or a schism in the soul while still keeping it connected. Now, another example of that, but very, very localised, is twins and triplets. Because with twins, definitely, the same soul's in two bodies, split between the two, and sometimes in three. But sometimes you can see twins, if triplets are born, you see twins that are twins, and they think the same. The third one isn't, because it's a different soul. So you can start to see that in a normal condition as well. We have as being, we recognise that twins think alike, they can communicate with each other telepathically sometimes in some level. So the abductions are basically those entities that we normally exist within or are working with in the higher frequency, connecting with the body that the soul is projected from that primary incarnation, the secondary incarnation, and making sure it's in the right working order, for example, or understanding the psychological responses, or seeing this environment through the connection created by the soul being in two different places at that high enough frequency. So they could see what's, for instance, if I got this other soul in my body now, they would see what I'm doing here. But they'll be in a higher frequency, in a different location within the physical universe. But they might want to study the body in more detail. So they would then take the body, remove the sentience so it doesn't get stressed because it wouldn't know what's going on, because it's a lower frequency, no communicative bandwidth. And they monitor the body, and they put it back again. And so abductions aren't just about monitoring the body types and seeing how we're responding to changes in environment, changes in political scenes, changes in how we interact with each other, wars, those sort of things, or complete harmonious interaction, and how the changes in the environment from a pollution perspective are affecting the body. It's also because there's a soul that's decided to, either using its own intention to a higher frequency or by using the technology available to them, is split between two bodies and it's being used as a, let's say, a sentient probe, if you want to, where they're observing a lower frequency environment on behalf of those in a higher frequency. And so they're also being able to involve themselves in this location on behalf of the soul that split itself between two locations. And they can take the body away and sometimes modify it if it's got a disease, so some people have been healed, but also they would use it to observe, experience and evolve through interaction with this other soul. So, in essence, from the physical perspective, aliens are just body types. They're body types that our souls use, our sentience uses. Just like we use a motor car, or a boat, or an aeroplane, or train. We move ourselves from one vehicle to another to experience or move around. Our soul does the same thing, it uses a body. On Earth it's this, or dolphins or whales. Other locations it's different form factors because of the environment that they have to be able to experience or to survive within the atmosphere that's there. How close it is to the sun, for example, whether it's subtropical, whether it's poisonous gas to us here. They have different body types. They have different body types depending upon the frequential level of which they're part of within the physical universe as well. Some appear to be more energetic, more like very small versions of the Northern Lights, for example, if you can see them. Others are totally invisible. And then you have those that are in the multiversal environment where they're completely invisible to us, but they are basically just pure sentience, that's using energy to interact with the environment. And that's it. So we can be, in fact, my understanding is that it's almost certain that you will have incarnated into an alien body, what we call an alien body, in the past. It's almost certain that you will again. And they're no different to us, it's just a different shape and a different way of existing because they have a different environment, different civilization, a different frequency level they come from. So, a different thought process for you all. That's that. Thank you. Take us some questions if they want to. Or we go for a drink.
Yeah, any questions on that? Because after the break he's going to be doing a different talk. So, no, 2 Q&A's now. I got one question.
Well,
It's kind of from me said that the reason why so many UFO sightings from the 40s onwards is because we detonated a nuclear device.
yeah.
Now, it has been said that the detonation of the nuclear device can cause an effect in other frequencies.
Yeah. Yeah, if you think about it, anything that is destroying atoms is also having a higher frequential effect. So there will be minor disturbances in the fourth frequency. Not so much in the fifth, but in the fourth frequency. So there's an indication there, well, yeah, let's see if we can make sure that they're dealing sensibly with this level of technology first. The other thing is that atomic energy is actually quite a technological leap, and working with quanta, with atoms, electrons, protons, neutrons, the quarks, the leptons, quark, stratus, and charm, and those levels of quanta below that, is actually getting into the substructure of the physical universe. Not quite, there's 6 levels of quanta, so there's basically. There's 3 levels that we don't know about yet, although there's some indication that yogis know about the very start point where energy becomes the starting point, or the building blocks of gross physicality, something called the inert. But these things, we started to mess with these levels of structure, it means we're also messing with them frequentially, not just physically. And so that does send vibrations or sometimes waves of energy in the next frequency set up as the fourth frequency set or the fifth frequency set. More than likely the fourth. So it's actually not just dangerous to us, it's also dangerous to those entities that are existing on the next levels up.
Right.
So if it became obvious that what we were doing was going to cause significant problems in the next levels up, we would be coached not to. Maybe these things don't start working again. Have any of you saw the Netflix series called The 3-Body Problem?
Yes.
Yeah? The SOFANs, messing with the particle accelerators. That's one way of stopping technology. Making results look completely random and unpredictable. Yeah. Any others? Yeah?
Yeah, mainstream astronomy, they talk about dark matter as this percentage of the universe that they don't understand. What do you think it is that they're sort of trying to find by using that term?
Yeah, well, being an engineer, engineers and scientists are pretty much the same, but at different levels of work. We tend to create a name for something we don't understand. So the objective is that they say the universe is stationary. First they said it was expanding, then they said it's contracting, then they say it's stationary, it's being held together by something. Well, all they can see between stars and galaxies is darkness. So they just call it dark matter, because they have no other way of describing it. But it's not dark, there's no matter there at all. It's just that there's higher frequencies, that there's other planetary bodies, planetary systems, galaxies on each of the different frequency levels that are within the physical universe, holding it all together. Because actually it's quite solid from an environmental perspective when you get to the 12th frequency. So you wouldn't see any darkness, you just see whatever's there. So it's just a case of giving a name to something that they don't understand to give an explanation, which is it's only going to be temporary. And my understanding is that I had a question about this, and I did a lecture on it on my YouTube channel, my Once That Sound YouTube channel, where somebody asked about the same thing about dark matter. And I had a meditation on it. I was told that it's to do with how we observe light. When we look at something with our telescopes, we see the light coming towards us. And light's affected by gravity as well, by the way, because it's both a wave and a particle. And so it appears to be coming towards us. Now, that light coming towards us creates the thought process that what's coming towards us is what we're seeing. So we're seeing an exploding star, a nova or supernova or something, or a galaxy being born, etc. We're seeing that coming towards us. When that light goes past us, we enter into the sphere of that light, which is emitted. So now we're inside the sphere. So when the overall centre, or when the sphere gets so large that although we're a distance away from the origin, we actually become more and more closer to the origin because the sphere is larger. We start to see beyond the origin, and the light's going that way. So we start to see it expanding, but actually it's still stationary. And that's another explanation for why we've both seen the universe appear to be expanding and appear to be contracting, but actually it's static. Yeah?
Are you saying that all abductions are kindly meant? The reason I ask is that I've heard and seen, I show you all, of people who've been abducted and it's been horrendous for them and they've never truly got over it.
Yeah, it can be, I mean, think about it, for an animal it can be traumatic, can't it? You know, taking your pets, we took our pet cat to the vet the other day, to have some teeth out, and it was terrified. You know, he wouldn't come near us once he came out of the vet for a bit. It's about understanding. From our perspective, taking an animal out of the wild, doing blood tests, doing temperature tests, doing all sorts of other tests, inoculating them, then putting a tracking device on is nothing. We're looking after the animal, we're saving the species. There's good intentions there. There's always good intentions with entities as well, aliens. It's just that we don't know, because we've lost our memory set because we've come down a higher frequency. So we don't know what we agreed to, and we don't understand that there's a higher reason for that abduction. And it's meant in goodwill, but because we have no experience of that contract or that agreement, or no experience of what they're going to do, and it's outside of our experiential range, we fear it. And therefore it becomes really scary, like a nightmare. Oh, who wouldn't be scared if you suddenly found yourself on an operating theatre with bits and pieces all stuck into you and stuff? Yeah? Of course you would. But because if you knew what it was, the fear factor wouldn't come into it so much. You'd still be concerned, of course, because it'll come from nowhere, which is why they sometimes use a method of anaesthesia to knock you out so that you wake up and all of a sudden you've got these burn marks or things on parts of your body, where you've lost time, for example. You know, you saw this orb of light in the sky in your car, next thing you know, your car's 30 miles down the road, and you've lost 3 days. You know, those sorts of things.
Okay, should we have a break now?
This is quite a short but interactive, I hope, presentation, and it's one that I created as a function of being asked to do a talk at my local Rotary Club, with a friend of mine who I cycle with, and I was explaining some of the things that I write about, or that I lecture about, and the workshops I do, and he was having a bit of trouble getting his head around understanding it from a belief-based system. And so I thought, well, how am I going to be able to give them something that they can work with if they're having trouble between believing it and throwing it away? So I gave them this particular presentation, which I created just for them. And I've only presented it, I think it's the 3rd time actually, in public. But I think it's quite good, because it gives you an anchor point as to understanding the difference between belief and knowledge, because they're 2 different things. And also, belief can turn to knowledge as well. So this is where we get a bit of the audience participation, maybe. So, I'll make a statement in a moment, But I'm going to give you an identification of what a personal belief system is versus what a personal knowledge-based system is, and how belief can, with the right level of education, become knowledge. Now, education is the key word here. So, can you read that, okay? I can project my consciousness into higher dimensions and their universes and communicate with the entities that are there. Do you believe me? Hands up those who do. There's those that don't. Excellent. Thank you. They're not the plants, by the way. They're special real people. Yeah? So, let me just tell you something. That statement is the reason why I've been able to do these books. It's not invented, it's not creative, it's not creative writing. It's information I've got through meditation. It took a long time to get to that level to be able to do it. But a belief system is something based upon personal choice. We choose to accept the statement or statements as the truth or fact, even if there's no personal experience. We choose to accept what our teachers tell us. We choose to accept what our parents tell us. We choose to accept what our friends tell us. We choose to accept what people of a similar thought process tell us. We tend to accept professional people such as doctors, scientists, politicians. Okay? Because we hold them in higher esteem than us, we tend to believe what they're saying as being the truth. We don't have the knowledge that they've got. They've been trained in that. They've been around a lot longer. They've been exposed to different things. They're our parents. They're our teachers. They're our father or mother figures. They're our main influencers. But maybe we haven't had the personal interaction with that which they're experiencing or telling us about as being the truth, to be able to say it actually is the truth, so it becomes a belief system. We choose to believe them. However, on the other side, maybe we experience something. So a knowledge-based system is accrue knowledge or education gained through our personal experiences. We've done this, we've done that, we've seen it, we've done it. I'm going to give you an example now. We're all going to work through it, hopefully, to turn you from a belief-based system to a knowledge-based system. Do you think you can do it? Yeah? Of course you can. And you can put yourself as being a 2-year-old child here, well, they're quite educated 2-year-old children these days. If you've never seen a light turn on by somebody pressing the switch, and they say to you, if I push that switch, that light's going to come on. And you've never seen this happen. You've never seen somebody push a switch and a light come on. Let's say from the 14th century. Do you believe them? Well, you might, if they're one of your authority figures, if they're one of your teachers, if they're someone like a doctor or a lawyer or somebody who's a higher education than you might choose to accept that what they're saying is right. But it's not until you do it yourself, you go over there, you push the button, oh, the light comes on, wow. Push it, it's gone off. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Put it on, put it off. You've now moved from a belief system where your friend or relative or teacher or loved one or educator or doctor or lawyer has told you, you push that button, the light comes on, and gone from belief because of their authority figure to doing it yourself. That makes sense? So you've gone from belief to knowledge. You've done it yourself. Or you've seen them first, sort of halfway house, you've seen them do it and you've tried it yourself. So you've gone from halfway from belief to knowledge by seeing them, and then you've done it yourself. Seeing things is what people who see UFOs do. They see it, they experience it themselves, they try and tell other people, and they go, don't be daft. unless you're the same thought process, the same mental disposition, the same level of interest, you reject it as being mumbo jumbo, nonsense. Because they haven't seen it, they haven't experienced it themselves. If it's somebody who's interested in that subject matter, they may choose to believe it. So they're in the halfway house. But that's just a surface level of knowledge. What makes the light switch turn a light on? Somebody tell me. Electricity. What's electricity? How does it get to the light? It gets there because there's a wire. Something called a wire that goes from the light switch to the light. Allows the passage of this electricity thing to go from there to there. Right, okay. Why does that thing glow white and spread light around? Because it's got a coil in there of metal, of a certain type of metal, that gets red hot, but is enveloped in a gas and stops it from burning out. Once you understand that from a scientific perspective, because you can see it, you think, oh, okay, I know that when I do that, electricity goes to that wire, to that, and that glows. Or it excites gases like xenon, krypton, neon, argon, okay? And creates a fluorescent light bulb to work. Or LED, where a PN junction, where the electrons go from one side, the positive side to the negative side, to a certain material, glows as a result of it. Once you understand that, you think, okay, now I know that does that, and that glows because of this technology. But it's only a certain level of knowledge, isn't it? It's only still surface level. Where does the electricity come from, that switch? Any ideas?
Power station.
Before then?
Flow of electrons.
No, before then, it comes from the fuse box, doesn't it? The electric meter, yeah? So you start to realise, you sit in the electric meter, you see the fuse box, you know that the electricity comes from there to the switch, well, through the fuse, of course, to the light, and it turns on. It comes from the power generating systems in the national grid. So that's the next level of knowledge then. You've gone from understanding you push the button to turn the light on, you understand why the light comes on, you understand that something called electricity goes from the switch to the light, turns it on, and you understand that electricity comes from the switch to the fuse, from the fuse box and the meter, and then earlier on, as Emily just said, it comes from the power generating system, national grid. Again, that's a level of knowledge, isn't it? You're deepening your knowledge all the way down. How is electricity generated, Emily?
Solar, wind, coal, burning gas, nuclear.
Okay, so there's different names, different ways in which we can make electricity.
Some form of energy anyway.
It's all a form of energy, yeah. Electricity is the movement of electrons down a conductor, or a material that allows those flow of electrons to go from one point to another point. The way it's generated usually is based upon the rotation of a metal inside a metal. So, with a dynamo, for example, before we had alternators on cars, you had a magnet and you had a coil of wire rotating, and that disturbed the electrons in the magnet and caused a flow of electrons which could be harvested and taken off on wires, on something called a commutator. Same thing on a bigger scale for the generation of electricity with wind farms, with tidal flow turbines, with turbines in waterfalls. In Scotland they use it a lot, hydroelectric power generation. Coal, nuclear, it's all to do with rotating a coil of metal, copper, inside another coil of metal, another copper, moving electrons around and allowing them to move out of that environment. So that's another level of knowledge. Then you go into solar cells. How does a solar cell work? Well, it creates an energetic response to receiving photons. Photons come in, they create a disturbance on the metals there, which creates a movement of electrons and therefore a charge. and they can use that to power things. So you start to see that once we understand the whole stream of information about why that light switch turns a light on, we get one level of understanding and knowledge. We moved away from a belief system to a knowledge system. Then we go in depth of knowledge by understanding what happens between the light switch and the fuse box and the meter and the national grid and the power generation and how electricity is generated and why it's generated and which different forms of generation there are. But most of it's about rotation, unfortunately. Even nuclear is rotation, unless you can harvest nuclear fusion, which is the holy grail right now. But we work on fission right now, the fusion's the holy grail. There's thought processes, and my late father-in-law did some communication, because he was interested in this stuff, with a guy in the States who was using what we would call sacred geometry. He had materials that were either laminated together and made in certain shapes or tubes, and he could create rain. He had these tube-like devices and these rotating octagons and polygons on boats, on aeroplanes, and he compressed the air by these things compressing the frequency above the gross physical, the etheric level, which is the fourth frequency. And he created cloud, and he created rain as a function of it. I mean, aeroplanes do it anyway, because they're going so fast they create these vapour trails. That's localised cloud, which is compressing the air. But again, you start to understand that there's a different way to generate something, because your knowledge base increases. The only way we move forwards in our understanding is by asking questions and experiencing it firsthand. Every time we decide to believe somebody, it's belief. Unless we know ourselves by educating ourselves, doing our research ourselves, doing our experiments ourselves, which is what happens in the education process from school to university and beyond, in our normal work environment as well, everything stays as a belief system. It becomes witchcraft. You're burnt at the stake or drowned in the ducking pool or something. And so it's important to realise that we should really recognise that there are things that we're not going to be able to experience ourselves, but others have. And if they've experienced it themselves and they can explain what they've experienced, then that allows you to move a little bit closer from the belief system into the experiential system. But not there, because you're not doing it yourself. But provided there's plenty of evidence to back up what they've said, and that's been experienced by other people, then it starts to become a knowledge-based system. So the light switch scenario takes you from very simple things, push a button, light comes on, to understanding the whole generation of electricity, should you choose to go through the education process and be able to do it yourself firsthand. When I was an engineer, I moved away from one particular department to another department, where we dealt with rotating machines. I understood the theory of how a motor worked or a dynamo worked, but to understand it further, the people I was with said, you're going to make your own motor. They gave me all the components that was normally put together by the assembly line. This is Lucas, this is in Birmingham, back in the very, 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 very early 80s. And they said, there's the drawing, there's how the windings go, see if you can make your own motor. And they left me to it. About 3 days later, I made a wiper motor for the car, because I'd looked at the design, I'd understand it, I'd made a few mistakes, done it again, and made it work. I'd done it myself. I've moved away from a belief system that somebody makes these things, so they must be able to be made. I've seen them, but I've not seen them being built, to building it myself. And everything you do, when you do it yourself, you go gardening, you learn to drive a car, yeah? You can fly, any one of you could learn to fly an aeroplane if you gave yourself the time and the patience. Okay? It might take some of you different time than somebody else. Somebody might do it in about 3 or 4 weeks, some might take 3 or 4 months, some might take 3 or 4 years. But you can all do it. And this is the important thing. We should all respect that knowledge, first-hand knowledge from something, when they explain it, is not specifically mumbo-jumbo to somebody who's not experienced it themselves. Their experience is our education, and our education opens our mind to be able to respect and accept the knowledge that somebody else has got, because they've experienced it, as being real, even though we've not experienced it ourselves. So, oops. There's 2 words there now, added in. Through meditation. And it took me a long time to get the meditation skill set to do this. I can project my consciousness into high dimensions and their universes. I had to create a structure that allowed me to do it. Other people have done this as well. Different ways, different lengths of time, but everybody I know about who've done this in different ways, they've all said the same thing. It took a long time and a lot of discipline to be able to project their consciousness or their sentience out of the body, astral travelling, interdimensional travel. You can all do it. It just means you've got to spend the time to be able to do it. And from my perspective, with my traversing the frequencies work, I've taught hundreds of people to do it, and they all do it. I've been teaching them since 2011, and they've all been able to do it. So, they've moved away from a belief system to a knowledge-based system. And so you can as well. That's it. Simple as that. 22 minutes. Okay, any questions? We have a question. Ask the question. There's a question asked, which is absolutely superb, about how an individual can connect with a from the future, can connect with somebody from the past. Can you explain it?
Yes. Over the last couple of years, I've been researching quite a bizarre case. It's a case of an entity from what I think was a higher dimension.
Mm.
It hasn't got any body, it hasn't got any form. What they managed to do was they managed to send messages from the past, 400, 500 years from the past, to the present. And it's quite bizarre, because they were sending messages, that, like I said, from the past, and then they were making it come into the future.
Mm.
How was that possible?
They were sending messages from the past into the future.
Yes.
Yeah. It's to do with frequency. Let me give you an example. It's not the light switch, by the way, it's something else. Think of a roll of cinefilm. I know we're digital now, but think of a roll of cinefilm. Yeah, who remembers Super 8? Yeah? Remember Super 8? Well, the bit before that, 8mm, we had that didn't have sound.
Standard 8. Standard 8.
Standard 8, yeah. Wind this up, let it go. Cinefilm is lots of camera shots. When you have your camera or your phone, you take a photograph, it's one image. You're capturing a point in time, a point in an event, okay? If you capture enough of them, let's say 60 events per second, you have an event that can basically look like it's moving. Because from where we are right now, without a projector, we have to look at each frame, one frame at a time. And it isn't moving at all, nothing's happening, it's the same thing. But when you go from the first one to the 60th one, it's like, oh, it's moved. Okay? Okay. So for us to see a moving picture, with the way in which our brain refreshes what it sees as a minimum frequency rate, we have to see 60 frames a second. It's called 60 hertz. If something happens multiple times per second, that's called a hertz. Hertz, H-E-R-T-Z. Okay? So if a film is going past our eyes at 60 frames a second, it looks like it's moving. If we slow it down, it goes into slow motion. If we go 30 frames a second, it goes to slow motion. Frequency, 30 hertz, 30 frames a second. Back up to real-time movement, 60 frames a second, 60 hertz. frequency, 60 hertz. High definition is capturing 200 frames a second. Ultra high definition, I think it's 4,000 frames a second. So you start to see more content can be added the more exposures you make per second. Now then, so we're looking at 1 frame a second. Where we are right now is like us seeing something at 1 frame a second. If we increase the frequency to 60 hertz, for example, we see the film moving. We start to see the images moving, and it's like the walkies and the talkies, as I used to say. If we increase the frequency, it's like double the speed. It's happening very, very fast. We can see things happening faster and faster and faster. So we can see the first image and the 3,000th image really quite quickly. Okay, we can see in a matter of seconds, basically. So we can see things quickly. The faster it goes, the more difficult it is for us to see it, because we don't have the processing power. We can see things go faster and faster, but eventually, if you go past exposing our eyes to frames beyond 200 hertz, it goes blurry. And eventually, if you increase the speed of the frequency too much, it just goes white. Because what we're seeing is beyond the frequential range in which our eyes and the images our eyes see can be interpreted by the brain. Our processing power isn't high enough. Our clock speed of our computer isn't fast enough. If, however, it was, then we could see the images, either slow or speed or fast, even though they're going past us at about 3,000 times a second. If we're even higher frequency, we could see the whole cinema reel film instantaneously. That cinema film might equal 1,000 years of observation. And if we're a high enough frequency, we can observe it all in one go, instantaneously, concurrently. I didn't say all at one time, did I? Because time doesn't exist. We can see it all in one go. Or we can choose to dive into one particular exposure. That's what's happening. These entities are so high a frequency that what they observe here can be observed instantaneously. 1,000 years can be observed instantaneously. This is why when people go to a medium and the medium says, yes, so you want to have a child, do you? Yeah, you're going to have one in 5 years' time. And it's 15 years later, and it still hasn't come. Because it's difficult to dive into that particular frame and get it right from their perspective, because things are happening so fast down here compared to where they are, because they're a higher frequency, that's dipping into a lower frequency environment and sticking a stake in the ground and saying, that's the time that you're going to get this child, or this is the time that you're going to get promoted, or this is the time that you're going to win the lottery, or this is the time that, etc., 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 is difficult for them. So that's where the mismatch comes, with mediums telling you about this is going to happen on certain dates. But the reason why we can communicate, or communication can happen between different time zones, is because of the function of the frequency of those individuals who are working with it. So those individuals or entities that are in the highest frequencies of the physical universe, they can achieve what we would call time travel because of a higher frequency. They can definitely do it in the multiversal environment. I'll tell you something else now. Those of you who choose to believe incarnation would normally expect their next incarnation to be at a future date. Because we're so low frequency, we experience things in this linear condition. But events occur in a spherical condition, where every event is in contact with every other event, either directly or indirectly. And so our next incarnation might be 600 years in the past, from our perspective. So we don't exist in a linear state. It's just that our frequential level that we're in now is such that we can only experience things in a linear state, one frame after another of the cinema film. Not all of them together.
I should have probably mentioned a bit more, because what happened was, it was in 1985,
Yeah.
and messages started coming through on a computer, which didn't have any internet, but then it was like a BBC microcomputer.
Yeah.
And the messages were coming through on, and you could print them out, you know, come through on a printer, you print them out. It all came through in Old English. Quite weird.
Mm.
And we had the entities then who called themselves 2109, and they were communicating with the computer as well as gentlemen from 400 years previous.
Mm.
And it was all coming to that. And they'd even predicted in the future that a book was written by the guy 400 years in the past,
Yeah.
and they even said that that book will be found. We still haven't found it.
Yeah.
But it's such a really weird, it's hard to get your head around, because it's out in all people's comfort zones, because it's coming from higher up, from behind, and it's combined in the future as well.
Yeah. Just because the person in the past is communicating with someone in the future doesn't mean that they're a lower frequency. They could be a higher frequency, but just focusing on another exposure in the cinema film.
Yeah. The weird thing was, the guy in the past, he had like a sphere with a cube inside, which was like a hologram.
Mm.
He could see into 1985, because it was in his house.
Mm.
The people from the future, the people from the present were actually living in that man's house who existed in 400 years ago.
Yeah.
And the more I research it, everything that was the guy from 400 years ago was saying, it's all true.
Yeah.
The people he was mentioning, it's all true.
Yeah.
Because we found through research that these people do exist.
Yeah. There's a book, I can't remember the lady's name now, but she wrote a book called Twitters. And she's an Ozark Mountain Publishing author. And she documented a number of these sorts of things. She calls them Twitters. It's on Amazon, if you look at Twitters. And basically, my understanding was, because she asked me what I thought about it, and I meditated on it, and I said, well, what's going on is that it's possible that you've got a lower frequency and a higher frequency getting close to each other. So you get a higher level of frequency, a higher point and a lower frequency, being in contact with a lower point in a higher frequency, and they connect together. Because she was reporting that people suddenly went down a road in New York, and all of a sudden New York wasn't there, and there was a hill there, and they saw an Indian on a horse, and nothing else around them, and other bits and pieces that were there before New York was there. And then the person was sort of, what was going on, and that dropped them down the frequencies a bit, and then that link disconnected. Sort of a localised wormhole, if you want to call that.
Yeah. But so the computer itself, the message would only come in a certain spot in the house. It wouldn't come through anywhere else.
Two frequencies in contact with each other.
Yeah. So if anyone's interested in that, it's called the Donaldson Messages. It's really a so bizarre case, but it is, the people involved, it's a case of like it's out of their comfort zone, because it's like, oh, it's entities from the future, or it's, you know, it doesn't sit with them, if you see what I mean.
You can understand how an entity of the right frequency level, or the right vehicle, could move through different events or time zones as well, quite easily, by using the right level of frequency and just moving in from one point to another point. Because the higher the frequency, the more you can drop into the different exposures on that cinema film, as an example. Good. Sorry, carry on. And then the guy behind you, did you have a question?
Oh, right, yeah. I was going to say, I think that past, present and future is not actually a thing. I think it's all one.
Yeah.
So the only thing that's in the way of that is our belief in time, in linear time, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And that's the barrier between us contacting different versions of ourselves in different timelines.
Yeah.
Because we're quite fractal, and we live in a kind of multiverse. And I think it's kind of quantum entanglement, you know, frequency of a thought of another version of myself, and I'm instantly creating that network, like you're meditating to those beings. I think it's way simpler than, you know, than having to concentrate or, you know, link in. We can do it quite quickly. But the time thing, there's loads of cases like that. There was a podcast in America which I was on, and one of the women on the podcast, she'd had a nasty car accident, and just before death, she woke up in another version of herself. She remembers the car accident, but she's stuck in a different timeline. So it's like there was a firewall protecting her from experiencing the accident. Yeah. And now she's speaking about it all over America. Yeah. You know,
one of our Sufan radio shows on Oystermouth Radio, guy was on it last week. It's going to be on our Spotify.
2 weeks.
In 2 weeks' time, it'll be on Spotify. Anyway, one of the shows, Simon was on there talking about experiences that you had. He was in a car and he experienced a crash. And then after that, the crash hadn't happened. But it's as if he was like he was aware of two different time things. Yeah. And I was going to say as well, just thought of it. Somebody told me once, I think it was a spiritual medium, Jonathan John, in Swansea. He said about he was saying about future lives and past lives all coexist at the same time. Yeah. And he created the analogy of a wheel. Your higher self, your true essence is the hub, and each spoke on the wheel is one lifetime. Yeah. And they're all together in a and makes sense. I think that's why they got one on the Indian flag. The flag of India has got a wheel on it, because Hindus they believe in reincarnation and
the wheel of life. Yeah. That's good.
We've covered a few things tonight.
Yeah. One of the things I was thinking the history of God, the first book I explained to me, is that we don't exist in time, we exist in something called event space. So everything's in a series of events, and there's other event streams within an event space and different event spaces. And every time we have a decision to make, or a choice, and we go that way, for instance, we're on a bus, and we get off the bus and we decide to go right, but we thought about going left. Then actually we do both. But another event space is created where we've gone left, and all the interactions with other people, the environments happen in parallel. And that there can be multiple thousands of event spaces that we create during a particular incarnation. But eventually, some of them might have an evolutionary dead end, and they come back to like branches of a tree, and that event finishes, and then the sentience associated with that gets pulled back to the nearest branch, or the nearest bigger branch, so to speak. And eventually, they all come back down to the trunk, which is the main event space of that particular soul or entity. So there are lots of different parallel things can happen at the same time. And people do, they like you say, that person has experienced that crash, or something else, you know, and it's not there anymore, it's gone. Because what they've done is that they've moved from one event space to another event, to the next event space, which becomes their dominant event space for that particular volume of sentience that's apportioned to that.
It's strange how trauma creates these other realities as well. We used to talk about nuclear stuff. But the power of that creates it's a portal for other realities. If you create some trauma, you create realities. And the narratives attached to those explosions.
Yeah, that's good. It's good questions, isn't it? Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Anybody else? No? That's it. I think that was it. Thank you very much.